that he would, in verse 3, it referenced that Melchizedek was made like the Son of God in that he had no beginning, no ending. And now here Jesus is in the likeness of Melchizedek, not on the basis of physical law. Melchizedek didn't become a priest because he was born into it. How did Melchizedek become a priest? The only way we can surmise, because we're not told, is that God had made him priest. And so Jesus, like Melchizedek, is going to be made a priest. And we're going to get that into the next layer as we look at that. He didn't do it on the basis of law, of a physical requirement, wasn't born into it, but according to the power of an indestructible or endless life. Melchizedek remains a priest because God has set it up that way that he apparently had no beginning, has no ending. By the power of an indestructible life, an endless life. And now Jesus is going to do the same thing, or has done the same thing. For it is attested of him, verse 17, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. He wasn't made a priest because he was born into it. He was made a priest because God said, you are that priest. And now he's going to go to the next layer, beginning in verse 18, about the oath. Remember, that was the fifth part from Psalm 110, the oath that God made. For on the one hand, there is a setting aside of a former commandment because of its weakness and uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect. And that goes back to what we looked at that one point about there's no perfection available through the Levitical priesthood. For the law made nothing perfect. On the other hand, there is a bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. Go back to chapter 6. We're going to look quickly at a section here that ties in with this idea of what he's talking about, the oath and bringing in a better hope through which we draw near to God. Back in chapter 6 and verse 13, we looked at last week, the example that the writer brings up about Abraham and the oath that was involved with Abraham. For when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. And saying, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply you. And so, having waited patiently, he obtained the promise. Abraham did obtain the promise. For men swear by one greater than themselves, and with them an oath given as confirmation is the end of every dispute. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath. And so by two unchangeable things, in reference to Abraham, the promise and the oath by which he confirmed that promise, so by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. What kind of a hope is that? Verse 19, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. What's the reference to the veil? Entering into the Holy of Holies. We have a hope that anchors our soul, a hope that is sure, steadfast, a hope, our hope enters the veil. Well, how did we earn the right to go into the Holy of Holies? What was in the Holy of Holies? What was the representation of that?
Mercy seat.
The mercy seat on top of the Ark of the Covenant, a representation of the embodiment of God with his people. So our hope enters within the veil. Verse 20, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Because Christ is of the order of Melchizedek, preceding the law, a priest forever, he serves as our high priest forever, because he's entered the holy place that we might enter with him. Verse 19 again, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Jesus went in before us as our high priest. Under the law, who could go into the Holy of Holies? The high priest only. Nobody else was ever allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. But because Jesus is our high priest, there's been a change. The veil was split in two, top to bottom, when Jesus was crucified. It was laid open. Jesus entered in, and he took us with him into the presence of God.
Through Jesus, we have access to God.
Through Jesus, we have access to God. Okay, go back to chapter 7, verse 19. On the other hand, there's bringing in of a better hope, through which we draw near to God. So, as high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek, Jesus brings us in with him to the presence of God. In John 14:6, Jesus declared, no one comes to the Father except through me. There's no other way to approach God, to be in his presence, except through Jesus. And then he goes on in verse 20, and inasmuch as it was not without an oath, for indeed they became priests without an oath, but he with an oath through the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you are a priest forever. So the four things out of Genesis 14, priest, king, the blessing and the receiving of tithes. The fifth, from Psalm 110, the oath. So the writer here is that they became priests, the Levites, without an oath. They were born into it. But with an oath, Melchizedek became priest, Messiah became priest. And notice how he words it here in verse 21. But he, God, with an oath, through the one, said to him. God is speaking directly to his Son, to the Messiah. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You, the Messiah, Jesus, you are a priest forever. In verse 22, so much the more also Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. The old law died on the cross. The new law, the law of Jesus, the better covenant, a guarantee of that. Okay, the next part of this, the last layer we'll look at, begins in we'll get down to verse 25 as we read through the rest of this. Verse 23, the former priests on the one hand existed in greater numbers, because they were prevented by death from continuing. But Jesus, on the other hand, because he continues forever, holds his priesthood permanently, just like Melchizedek. No beginning, no end. He holds that priesthood forever. Jesus continues forever. He holds the priesthood permanently. He continues with every generation of Christians as our high priest. All the Christians before us, their high priest was Jesus. All the Christians that will come after us, the high priest is Jesus. So verse 25, the last layer, is one of those therefore passages. Everything he's said before. Therefore, he is able also to save forever those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. What was one of the roles of the high priest? To intercede for the people, to make atonement for the sins, for his own sins and for the sins of the people. He interceded on behalf of the people before God. And now this is the role that Jesus has taken on as our high priest. He always lives to make intercession for them. How often in any given day do you think about Jesus in the presence of God interceding specifically for you? Every day, every hour, thinking about, here's Jesus as our high priest. He's right there in the presence of God. He's interceding for you and for me, for every Christian. He's interceding. This is my one that's been obedient to me. They've followed my commands. I've forgiven them. Accept them as perfect, as forgiven. He's interceding for us. Verse 26, for it was fitting for us to have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners and exalted above the heavens, who does not need daily, like those high priests, to offer up sacrifices first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people, because this he did once for all when he offered up himself. He is high priest in the sense that they were high priests, but that's where the similarity ends, because he is holy, innocent, undefiled. He was the perfect sacrifice, and by his perfection, he's also high priest for us. And he did this once for all when he offered up himself. Verse 28, for the law appoints men as high priests who are weak, but by word of the oath which came after the law appoints his Son, made perfect forever. Melchizedek came before the law. His priesthood was before the law. The Messiah's priesthood was as an order of Melchizedek before the law. But the oath which came after the law appoints a Son made perfect forever. The Word of God as an oath, a God who cannot lie, who will not change. He said after the law was given, you, my Son, are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. It supersedes the law. And when the law died, it was all in effect. And I just want to go ahead and read the first two verses of chapter 8 because they really do tie into this. He says, now the main point in what has been said is this. The main point, he says, we have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heavens. Where did Jesus go when he went in to the veil, through the veil? to the presence of God. And where is he? At the presence of God. He has taken his seat at the right hand. What was the most important place in any kingdom in antiquity, of any king? What was the next most important place? To be at his right hand. Jesus is there interceding for us at the right hand of God, the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heavens, a minister in the sanctuary and in the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. The true tabernacle, not the physical tabernacle that came out with the law of Moses and eventually the temple, the one that the Lord pitched. So here we have, real quick, everything you need to know about Melchizedek. It's a tough chapter to get through. The writer warned his readers, there's much that I have to tell you. You may not be able to handle it. It's well worth going back and studying and learning about Melchizedek for this very purpose. Like I said, this is things at the deep end of the pool. Sometimes we need to be drugged out of the shallow end and get thrown into the deep end to know what's going on. Appreciate your time this morning. We're going to be out of town next Sunday morning. Robbie Davis is going to teach a class, and it'll be well worth it. Appreciate the time this morning. Thank you. When are you going to be leaving?